The boardroom of Beaumont and Company hadn't just aged poorly, it had rotted from the inside out, a mausoleum of pride and delusion. The massive ebony table still stood like the skeleton of an empire long gone, its polished surface hiding decades of betrayal, backroom power plays and family wars dressed up as loyalty. Around it, leather chairs sagged, crushed under the weight of generations who had clawed and devoured their own blood for control. And the walls, a shrine to a lie. Framed photographs lined the panels, smiling faces frozen in choreographed portraits of success and unity. But in every single frame I was missing. I am Amelia Beaumont. At least that's the name stamped on their trust fund documents. To them, I've always been a shadow, a whispered embarrassment floating through charity banquets and cocktail galas. Poor Dominic Beaumont's rebellious daughter, they would sigh behind champagne glasses, the one who walked away from her inheritance. Today they gathered again, clinging to the illusion of control, summoned under the excuse of an emergency meeting to save the company. But I already knew the truth. The rot had gone too deep, and none of them realized it was already mine. So at the head of the table stood Uncle Victor, puffed up like a bloated monarch, tugging at the lapels of his custom-made suit as he jabbed a thick finger toward the presentation screen. "The numbers don't lie," he growled. "Last quarter was the worst in 20 years. The board's getting nervous." Across from him, Leon, my golden boy cousin, gifted a title he never worked for, smirked like it was all a joke. "The board works for us," he scoffed. "We're Beaumonts." If only they knew. For 3 years, I had been quietly building Altara Group layer by layer, shell by shell, until every thread of influence in Beaumont and Company ran through my hands. They thought they owned the board. I owned the board. "The tech division is bleeding us dry," Helena chimed in without lifting her eyes from her phone, the family's so-called chief innovation officer who couldn't tell a fiber optic cable from a dinner knife. And just like that, I watched them ready themselves to throw away the only thing that could save them. "We should just cut it loose." Helena sighed, still scrolling like this was some minor inconvenience interrupting her day. I felt the corner of my mouth twitch, not quite a smile, not quite a laugh, because what they saw is dead weight. I had already turned to gold. They couldn't see it, not through their fog of arrogance, not through the cracked glass of old money pride. And the cruelest part, the tech division they were so eager to discard, was already mine. So was the company. What they didn't know, what they'd never cared enough to learn, was that under my leadership, Altara Group had quietly developed the very technology capable of transforming their dying division into a billion-dollar giant. But they'd never lived to see it, because they were too proud, too blind. "What the hell are you smirking at?" Uncle Victor's voice cut through the room like a whip, snapping every head in my direction. Even Helena finally peeled her eyes off her phone, one perfectly arched brow, rising with mild curiosity, like she was noticing I was in the room for the first time all day. "You think something's funny?" Victor spat, his voice curling like smoke in a burning house. I leaned back in my chair, fingers laced loosely in my lap, my face unreadable. "Just considering the solutions?" I answered, keeping my voice flat as glass.
Chashman.
Victor's face twisted, his lip curling like he'd just tasted something rotten. "Solutions from you." He drew out the words, slowly slicing them thin like he wanted to make sure every insult landed. "From the girl who walked away from a director's seat to go play entrepreneur." I felt the familiar sting of it, the same line they'd used for years, polished and worn like a family heirloom. They never saw the truth beneath the insult. 5 years ago, I had walked away. Refused their empty title, Director of Brand Strategy, nothing more than a cage with gold bars meant to keep me busy and quiet while they ran the real empire. Instead, I took my inheritance, every dollar they mocked me for burning, and built Altara Group from nothing but vision and grit. While they had been busy polishing the ruins of their so-called empire, I had been building something real, investing, acquiring, shaping a future so far beyond their comprehension, they wouldn't recognize it if it hit them in the face. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone as smooth as cut glass, "I do have some experience in corporate restructuring." Each word landed softer than air, yet sharper than they realized. Leon let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Experience," he sneered. You mean running that little startup of yours from a WeWork cubicle? Please, Amelia, this is $1 billion empire. Leave the real business to the grown-ups. I almost laughed. If only they knew. My real office sat 47 floors above this dying building, spanning 3 entire floors in the city's tallest tower overlooking the skyline they still believe they ruled. That WeWork address they loved to mock, nothing but a decoy. A story I'd let them believe so they would keep underestimating me. I let my gaze drift to my father, Dominic Beaumont. He sat there silent, as he had so many times before, shrinking, watching, too afraid to pick a side. Last year, he'd handed the company over to Victor against every warning I gave him. He had always been too soft, too desperate to keep the family from splintering, even if it meant crowning a fool. Finally, he cleared his throat, barely a breath. Amelia's company, he began weakly, has done some impressive work. Maybe we should listen. Victor let out a low, cutting laugh. Impressive, he repeated with venom. Dominic, your daughter plays dress-up while the rest of us run a real empire. And then, like a blade twisted in an old wound, he spat the word I'd heard more times than I could count. She's worthless. Worthless. The word hung in the air, heavier than any insult they had ever thrown at me. How many times had they branded me with it? When I challenged their outdated traditions? When I dared to push for change? When I refused to play the decorative role they had boxed up like a prize I never asked for? Ishamba. Across the table, Helena sighed loudly, flicking her eyes to her phone like this entire meeting bored her. Can we move on to something real? She groaned. I have a lunch reservation at Marquette in 20 minutes. I glanced at my watch. 4 minutes. 4 minutes until the announcement hit. 4 minutes until their ground cracked beneath them. I leaned forward, voice low, sharp enough to draw blood. The tech division isn't your problem. The air shifted, tightened, every head turned toward me, every glance narrowing, calculating. I let the silence hang. 1 heartbeat. 2, upward. Your real problem, I continued, voice like steel wrapped in silk, is your entire business model. I watched them squirm, watched the tension snap tighter like a wire ready to break. You're bleeding market share because you refuse to evolve. This time, Victor's fist slammed against the table, the sound thundering through the room. How dare you? His face flushed, deep purple veins bulging at his temple. I built this company on the very principles your grandfather taught us, he barked. We don't need your tech world garbage here. I let out a slow, pitying smile, because I remembered my grandfather, not the myth they worshipped, but the man who built his empire on risk, reinvention, and fearless vision, not stale tradition. Those very principles, I replied, ice threading through every word, are exactly why you're failing. I rose slowly, feeling the air shift as I let my words carve through the room like a scalpel. The market has changed, technology has changed, but you don't. You're still trapped in a version of this company that died years ago. Enough, Victor's voice erupted like a cannon blast, rattling the air as his fists trembled on the table's edge. You walked away. You gave this up. You don't get to sit here and preach to us. You're nothing, nothing to this family, nothing to this company. Ita. And then, like the beat of a drum, I had waited years to hear the door cracked open. Maggie, Victor's longtime secretary, stood frozen at the threshold, her face pale as ash, voice trembling, like the ground had already shifted beneath her. Sir, Mr. Beaumont, the board is on the line. They've called an emergency session. She swallowed hard, glancing nervously at me as if she already knew the outcome. Altara Group has just acquired controlling interest in Beaumont and Company. The words hit like a bomb, not loud but deadly. The room collapsed into chaotic disbelief. Leon's engraved fountain pen slipped from his fingers, landing on the table with a sharp clatter, as if firing the starting pistol in a race they had already lost. Across from him, Helena's phone slid from her hand, hitting the table with a dull, hollow thud, louder than any excuse they could have offered. And Victor stood frozen, his mouth flapping open and closed like a drowning man gasping for breath, as if someone had ripped every ounce of oxygen from the room. Altara Group, my father's voice cracked through the silence, barely more than a whisper, quivering with something that sounded almost like fear. I stood fully now, slow, deliberate, feeling the weight of 3 years of silent work settle on my shoulders like a tailored crown. Although, I let the words curl softly like smoke wrapping around their throats. I prefer its full name, Altara Global Holdings. I watched the realization spread across their faces like a slow, crushing tide. The largest digital transformation firm in the country, specializing in pulling dying empires like Beaumont and Company out of their graves, or burying them properly when they've rotted beyond saving. Silence. Not the fragile kind, the crushing, total, beautiful kind. Years of being mocked. Years of being dismissed. Years of hearing that word worthless echo through these walls like a curse. And now I had broken the curse. That's impossible, Leon stammered, his face draining of color, his voice cracking like thin glass. Altara is a billion-dollar giant. You just ran a startup. For a brief second, I almost pitied him. Almost. I reached calmly for my phone, connected it to the projector, and with a few precise swipes, their entire illusion collapsed. There it was, my face, bold, undeniable, on the homepage of Altara Global Holdings. Founder and CEO Amelia Beaumont. A portfolio of acquisitions that dwarfed their outdated empire. A headquarters rising higher than any tower they'd ever built. A market valuation they couldn't even begin to match. That little startup, I whispered, twisting the blade deeper with every syllable, was never real. It was just a mask, a distraction. While you were all too busy laughing at me, I was building the future you never saw coming. I let my gaze sweep the table, pinning them one by one. Leon, Helena, Victor. Every time you called me worthless, I said, my voice cutting through their panic like a blade through silk, I bought more shares. Every time you laughed at my little company, I doubled down. I grew stronger while you stood still. Helena's face had drained of color. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, like the reality had just punched the air from her lungs. I leaned in just enough to let the truth sink in where it hurt the most. I turned back to the room, my voice cold and clean, slicing the tension like shattered glass. The tech division, I announced, will be the first to undergo a full restructuring. I let the words land like the first crack of thunder before the storm. And after that, every other department you've run into the ground. I paused just long enough to watch the horror settle on their faces. In 10 minutes, the board will confirm me as CEO. And at noon, the rest of the world will know. Victor sank back, his voice cracked, brittle, almost childlike. You can't do this, he whispered. We're family. I let out a low, bitter breath, not quite a laugh, not cruel, just done. I stepped closer, slow and deliberate, lowering my voice until it slid like a blade between his ribs. Family. Was it family when you called me worthless? When you humiliated every idea I dared to bring to this table? When you turned this company into a private playground for your spoiled children while you bled it dry? Across the table, my father stood trembling, reaching toward me like a man trying to catch smoke. Amelia, please, he whispered. We can talk about this. I turned to face him fully, my expression frozen, my voice cutting colder than winter air. We could have talked, I said, years ago, when I begged you to listen, when I warned you about Victor, when I tried to save this company before it collapsed. I turned back to the rest-locking eyes with every single one of them. You all played your parts perfectly. The dismissive uncle, the silent father, the cousins who could only mock what they didn't understand. I leaned forward, both hands pressed firmly on the table. And now I'm playing mine. Maggie, still standing, frozen by the door, clutched the folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. Sir, she whispered, the press is already on the line. They're asking for a statement about the acquisition. Victor collapsed into his chair. All the weight he carried for years, suddenly nothing but air. A statement about how my worthless niece just stole the company out from under us, he rasped, barely breathing the words. I smiled, stepping into the silence. Leaning forward, I dropped my voice to a dagger's edge. Oh, I'm not worthless anymore. I pressed both palms flat on the table, owning every inch of the ground they thought they stood on. I'm your boss. And that's when the room detonated again, this time in flames of pure panic. Helena's composure cracked, first mascara streaking down her face like ink running in the rain. Leon was already shouting into his phone, his voice rising higher, scrambling for a lawyer who couldn't save him. And Victor stood there clutching his chest, breath shallow, eyes wide with disbelief, like he was watching his kingdom collapse in real time. And me, I was just getting started. I strode to the head of the table, wrapped my fingers around Victor's chair, and sat down like it had always been mine. I opened my laptop with slow, deliberate precision, letting the silence stretch, letting them squirm in it. I looked up, owning the moment, as if I'd been born to sit in this chair. Now, I announced, my voice cold, smooth, unshakable. Shall we begin the restructuring? I've got quite a few ideas, especially for the tech division. For the first time in years, they didn't cut me off. They didn't argue. They didn't mock. They just sat there, too stunned to move, too shattered to fight back. Because deep down, they finally knew this wasn't their company anymore. It was mine. The daughter they called worthless had just become the most dangerous voice in the room. And this was just the beginning. The next few hours ripped through Beaumont and Cumber like a wildfire. No more charades, no more lies. Just cold, hard facts laid bare on the boardroom table. The board vote was swift, unanimous. My ownership left them with no room to maneuver. They had no choice but to crown me CEO. And right on schedule at noon, the press release went live. Within minutes, Beaumont and Company's stock spiked 15%. The market had spoken. And unlike my family, the market approved. Victor, once so loud, so untouchable, now paced the empty boardroom like a trapped animal, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. "This is illegal," he barked, his words ricocheting off glass walls. "You had to cheat. There's no way this is legal." I leaned back in his old chair, calm, steady, untouchable. "Every move I made was legal," I replied softly, each word landing like a hammer on glass. I watched him flinch, watched the color drain from his face. "Maybe if you'd spent less time bragging at country clubs and more time actually reading the shareholder reports, you might have noticed Altara quietly buying your shares for 3 years." Across the table, Helena was typing frantically, probably pleading with her lawyers for some loophole that didn't exist. I tilted my head like I just remembered something trivial, a final nail for their coffin. "Oh, and Helena," I added, my voice light as glass, sharp as steel, "your position as Chief Innovation Officer terminated, effective immediately." I let the silence hold for just a beat, letting the weight of Helena's firing sink in like ice water. Then I turned calm, steady toward Leon. "Same goes for your VP title," I said simply, like I was reading from a script I'd already memorized. Leon shot to his feet, his face twisting with fury, his voice breaking under the weight of his collapsing world. "You can't fire us. We're Beaumont's." I stood perfectly still, didn't flinch, didn't blink. "So am I whispered, letting the words sting like salt in an open wound. "The worthless Beaumont you all love to laugh at." Ma, I leaned in close enough for him to feel the knife twist. "How does it feel to be fired by the one person you swore would never matter?" Across the table, my father sank deeper into his chair, shoulders curving inward as if he could fold himself small enough to disappear. "Where did we go wrong?" he breathed, his voice so thin it almost broke the air itself. How, how didn't we see this coming?" I stood gathering my phone, my notes, and the power they had handed me without realizing it. I met my father's shattered gaze one last time. "You saw exactly what you wanted to see," I said softly. "A rebellious daughter who refused to follow your rules." I let the silence stretch sharper with every second. "It never crossed your mind, did it?" I paused at the door, turning back just long enough to drop the final truth. That I was playing a completely different game. Right on cue, Danica, my chief of staff, appeared in the doorway, composed, professional. "Miss Beaumont," she announced evenly, "the transition team is ready. The auditors are waiting to begin." I heard Victor suck in a sharp breath, his face draining of color. I turned back toward them, my smile thin, deliberate, cold. "Auditors? I repeated, rolling the words slowly, letting them feel the walls closing in. Time to dig through the wreckage you've all been hiding. Country club fees charged to the company, fake business trips to private resorts, loans to family members that mysteriously never got repaid. I leaned in low, sharp, deadly. I have a feeling the SEC will have a field day. Across the room, Helena's voice cracked barely above a whisper. You'd really destroy your own family. The press conference aired before the ink had dried on the board's resignation letters. Every headline screamed the truth they had spent years trying to bury Altara. Global acquires majority stake in Beaumont and Cooperton. Amelia Beaumont confirmed as new campus CEO. The media called it ruthless. The market called it brilliant. I called it long overdue. The real purge came next. Entire departments were gutted, dead weight cut clean. Leaders who had coasted on the family name for decades were escorted out under security's watchful eyes. Some begged, some threatened. None survived. By the end of the week, the once crowded towers of Beaumont and Como stood silent offices, emptied walls stripped down to glass and bone. And in the ruins they left behind, I built something new. At sunrise, the new logo went up. Sleek, sharp, relentless. Gone was the bloated, gold-leafed crest that had hung for half a century, weighing the company down like a monument to arrogance. In its place, a phoenix in motion, not rising from ashes, burning what never deserved to rise again. I stood by my office window, watching the crew strip the last of the old signage from the building. Danica stood beside me, tablet in hand, her expression tight but steady. The staff is nervous, she said quietly. They're waiting to hear what's next. I turned toward her, my voice unshaken. Call an all-hands meeting, I replied. I'll tell them myself. An hour later, I stood at the front of the largest auditorium on campus. 1,000 employees sat frozen, their faces tense between fear and fragile hope, wondering if they were next. I let the silence stretch, not to intimidate, but to command their attention. You've heard the headlines, I began. You've seen the fallout. I let my words hang blunt, unfiltered. And I know many of you are wondering if you're next. I paused, letting them feel the weight of it before cutting through it clean. Let me make this clear. The days of this company being a playground for the privileged few are over. If you're here to build something real, something that lasts, you have nothing to fear. I scanned the crowd, locking eyes with as many as I could reach. But if you're here to protect old power, old games, or old lies, your time is up. The room held its breath, tight and waiting, and then someone clapped. Soft at first, then another, and another. Until the room shook with it, I stood there rooted, unmoved, unapologetic. Because this time they weren't clapping for the Beaumont name. They were clapping for me. The tech division, once mocked, nearly sold off, became the new heart of the company. We ripped out the dead wood, tore down the empty titles, erased every family favor. We rebuilt, no cousins, no friends of friends, no empty legacies. I hired builders, visionaries, leaders who didn't care about my name, only the future we were building together. The tech division, once a joke in their eyes, now beat louder than anything Beaumont and Company had ever built. Victor tried first, scrambling behind closed doors, desperate to rally the last loyal shareholders. But it was too late. Most had already sold their stakes to Altara. His war ended before it even began. Helena was next. She ran to the press, spinning herself as the betrayed niece, painting me as the rogue heiress who had torn the Beaumont legacy apart. But the headlines told a very different story. Altara's stock soared, the tech division thrived, the market cheered, and Helena's voice was drowned beneath the weight of my success. Leon didn't send lawyers, he didn't send threats, he came himself, straight to my office, the office that used to belong to Victor. He carried nothing but an olive branch and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Come on, Amelia. He started slipping back into that polished charm he'd worn like armor since we were kids. We're family. We can fix this. Make Beaumont and Company a family company again. I leaned back in his old chair, studying him like a man already gone, already replaced. Tell me something, Leon, I asked softly, my voice flat as polished stone. Have you learned your lesson yet? He shifted his confidence, cracking just slightly. We underestimated you, he admitted, his voice tight, his smile tighter. But we can rebuild. We can bring the family back. I stood turning to the window, watching the sky burn gold beneath the setting sun. When I turned back, I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't have to move. It is a family company now, I replied almost gently. Just not your family anymore. His grin faltered, and for the first time I saw something I never thought I'd see in Leon. Defeat, real, raw, complete. Your seat's already been filled, I added, my voice barely a whisper, by someone qualified. I let the silence hang sharp and heavy. Might be time to update your resume. He left with nothing. No title, no seat, not even his pride. The Beaumont dynasty was gone. Every line confirmed what I had suspected for years. Victor had funneled millions through shell companies. Helena had stuffed payroll with ghost employees. Leon had been leaking insider trades, fattening his circle's pockets. My legal team stepped in quietly, faces tight, hands full of evidence. The SEC will want to investigate, one warned. I didn't flinch. Give them everything, I replied cold final. Every document, every transfer, every hidden account. Let the world see exactly how the Beaumont family did business. Across the room, my father sat silently, his face carved from stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was a brittle whisper. They'll go to prison, he said, as if saying it out loud might make it less real. I turned to him steady, no longer pretending. They made their choices, I answered, just like they chose to call me worthless. And collapse they did harder than anyone imagined. Victor charged with felony embezzlement. Helena and Leon banned for life from the financial industry. The Beaumont name reduced to a headline soaked in disgrace. And while they burned, Altara soared. Our stock doubled in the first month. Investors flooded in, pouring capital into the future they once mocked. With new leadership, real talent, real vision, we rolled out innovations the old board never had the courage to imagine. What once rotted under ego and legacy now thrived under merit and purpose. 6 months later, I sat alone in the top floor office, the city glowing beneath me. But I wasn't looking at the skyline. My eyes rested on a single photo, the last Beaumont Christmas before I walked away. A perfect scene, frozen smiles, every face playing their part. Except me standing at the edge already planning my exit. I had known even then I never belonged in their pretty little lie. Danica appeared quietly at the door. Victor's sentencing is tomorrow, she reminded gently. Will you attend? I didn't answer right away. I could already picture it. Victor standing in court stripped of everything he bled this company dry to keep. I could hear the headlines, feel the weight of every camera flash, every whisper in the gallery. I closed the folder softly, letting the moment settle. No, I said, my voice steady and clear. I have a company to run. Danica turned to leave, but paused at the door. The new boardroom portraits just arrived, she added quietly. Should I hang them? I glanced at the bare walls, remembering the old ones. Rows of frozen smiles, manufactured pride, a legacy that never belonged to me. I didn't hesitate. Take them all down, I said, soft but final. Every last one. I crossed the room, stood by the window, watching the city pulse below like a living thing. This isn't a family company anymore, I breathed to no one in particular. It's something better. I closed the folder in my hands, letting the idea of that courtroom dissolve like smoke. I didn't need to see the sentencing. I didn't need to hear the verdict. I had lived that verdict for years, watching from the sidelines while they judged me. Now it was their turn. Danica lingered, her hand resting on the doorframe. You could start fresh, she offered softly. Put up something new. Your story. Your legacy. I let the words hang in the air, heavy with possibility. My eyes drifted to the old photograph, again that perfect staged holiday portrait. A lie frozen in time. A reminder of who they tried to make me and who I refused to become. I turned to the bare wall behind my desk, empty, ready. No more family portraits, I whispered. No more staged memories. I reached for a simple pen, uncapped it with a soft, clean click, and wrote one simple truth on a blank sheet of paper. Legacy isn't inherited, it's built. I pinned it to the wall, the first mark of my story, and for the first time since I'd walked back through those doors, it settled inside me. Not vengeance, not bitterness, just freedom. I turned back to my desk, placed my hand on the polished surface, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Tomorrow would bring headlines, trials, more fallout. But tonight belonged to me. No more standing on the edge of the frame. No more chasing their approval. No more carrying their legacy. They had already taken enough. Enough years. Enough space in my mind. Enough breath I'd never get back. Tonight wasn't about them. It was about what came next. I turned to my desk to the plans laid out like a blueprint for the future new partnerships. Global expansions, a vision that stretched far beyond the ruins they left behind. This was mine now, and for the first time, there was nothing left to apologize for. No more names to protect. No more ghosts to chase. Just freedom. Pure, unapologetic, unstoppable. Danica appeared again, her voice low but certain. "The team's waiting," she said. I nodded, rolling up my sleeves, grounding myself in the weight of this moment. "Good," I replied, "because we're just getting started." And as I stepped into the hallway, into the heartbeat of a company reborn, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of everything they said I'd never build. And this time, no one would see it coming.